everybody. Welcome back to our final session of Beyond. I really can't believe it, but we've gone through 7 sessions over the course of the past 3 days, really reimagining what journalism can look like here in Philadelphia, a future that is more liberatory and inclusive and equitable for all communities. And it is fitting that with that conversation, and in a city like Philadelphia that is 45% Black, that we end with a panel really talking about how we can amplify these stories from community members who have already been doing that work. But I'm not going to delay the hour too much. I just want to remind you all before we get started with this session that after the summit, we will be taking all of the lessons that we've learned from these past 3 days and starting to package them to start to think through how we can create a collective vision and start working toward it to create a more liberatory future. But in this session, I have the incredible privilege of introducing the curator and moderator for this panel. Sophia Ballen is an award-winning journalist, writer, producer, and curator. She's the creator of the award-winning Black History Untold project. She's written about trends and the emergence of Black Twitter, covered major news events such as local Ferguson and Baltimore protests in Philly, photographed and produced digital fashion features, and contributed opinion pieces that speak to the millennial soul. Ballen aims to humanize all walks of life through mentorship and her work, which included being a features reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer for 3 years. She's interviewed everyone from Tyler Perry to Tamron Hall. Her written work has also been featured on Huffington Post, Washington Post, OK Player, Essence, Ebony, Shondaland, and Fader. So she's been doing a lot. Her dedication to the craft has led her to honors that include being named the 2017 PABJ Journalist of the Year. The Institute of Caribbean Studies named her Caribbean American 30 Under 30 Emerging Leader. She received citation of honor from the city of Philadelphia for her work, and she was named one of Temple University's 30 Under 30 Owls to Watch. In 2019, the Brooklyn Nets reached out to her to produce a New York-centered Black History Untold series for them. She's also been commissioned to produce video work for AJ Plus, I1 Digital, and the ACLU. Last year, Black History Untold premiered its short revolution-themed documentary at the Museum of American Revolution. She's been featured in Forbes, Philly Mag, and the Philadelphia Tribune. And Ballen was recently named an ARI Real Changemaker and awarded a $20,000 grant to continue her work with Black History Untold, so kudos to her. All my life, I've learned that there were stories untold and that not every legend was etched into bronze. My goal is to tell their stories. That's a quote from her. So with that, I'm going to turn this panel and this conversation over to the incomparable Sophia Ballen.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that amazing introduction. And thank you to the LenFest Institute for having me. Welcome to Reclaiming Our Stories. In this session, we will be highlighting how leaders work in tandem with their communities to share Black stories through non-traditional means. This year, we've experienced a global pandemic, global unrest, and a tumultuous election. We've seen the institutions that were meant to protect and serve fail us, whether it was law enforcement, our current administration, or newsrooms. In June, protesters took to the streets of Philadelphia to protest the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many more. When property was damaged in the midst of the protest, the Philadelphia Inquirer published an article with the headline, "Buildings Matter Too." I was enraged, but not surprised. After all, I had worked there for 3 years as a reporter. I was there in 2015 when live tweeting protests using the hashtag Black Lives Matter was deemed controversial. I used the hashtag anyway, and a meeting was held where an editor compared it to hate speech. I've watched reporters of color work double time as not only journalists, but stand-in diversity consultants on committees. I've experienced the most microaggressive and anti-Black behavior within newsrooms. This anti-Blackness is not native or unique to the Inquirer, but to an entire media industry that was built on it. And yet, these were the people tasked with telling our stories, telling the stories of a people I love dearly. I left not only because I wanted to own my project and I wanted to do journalism differently, but I grew tired of explaining Blackness when I could really just be doing the work. I grew tired of being placed at odds with my community in the name of being objective. Or, as my former colleague said in their incisive open letter, being told to show both sides of issues there were no two sides of. I realized early on that if there were not dramatic cultural shifts in newsrooms, they would not only fail their communities, but they would fail, period. Working now as an independent journalist, it is still a consistent fight to tell the full breadth of Black stories. Stories that not only talk about how we've struggled or fought for equality, but also how we love, our beauty, and our joy. Stories about us just being human beings. What gives me and the industry hope are those journalists who continue to shake the table in these newsrooms, who advocate for Black and brown communities, knowing that the results often ostracize them. They won't get the awards from their peers. They may not get the raise or promotion or support. They're deemed angry or difficult. It's often thankless, but we, the people, thank you. What gives me and the industry hope is the corrective and collective work that I see happening in the community that is not only filling in gaps left by local media, but have also pushed outlets to be more transparent and accountable. As someone who has attended one too many diversity dinners, I'm not naive enough to trust or believe that this well-curated summit alone will transform newsrooms. But the purpose of this recorded session that I will be sharing on multiple platforms is to spark the mind or invigorate the person in the community who will. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm very excited for our conversation and to speak with these brilliant, brilliant folks doing amazing work that inspires me. And anyone who knows me knows that I love poetry. I love a good poet. I feel like they always center our conversations, and I'm honored to bring up a poet that I admire. Their name is Afak. Afak is a Philly-based daughter with grandfather tendencies. Assembled in Yemen from Sudanese parts, Afak considers themselves a global citizen of their own country. They are an international award-winning poet, a museum exhibiting photographer, a visual activist, and justice educator who seeks to love the world until it loves them back. Thank you, Afak. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. When I first heard about this event and what we were talking about, it made me think about my two countries, which is Philadelphia and Sudan. Sudan is a dictatorship. Because I'm from there, I understand what rhetoric can do to a community. As an 18 or 19-year-old, I was actually arrested in Darfur for photographing as a photojournalist. In the making, I was arrested just for documenting what I saw in the refugee camps. I think about this and I mentioned this, and I remember what happened in Philadelphia with the Inquirer headline talking about buildings matter too, and many articles that just demonize Black folk and really make us less than human. I think about the dictatorship, how it uses language to corrupt, to manipulate, and how it makes one group of people feel small, broken, and even the way we see ourselves becomes questioned. So the poem that I'm sharing has all of those thoughts in mind. I mentioned two countries, but I'm really thinking about America, the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm thinking about all the people and activists and people who don't think of themselves as activists, who don't realize how much words matter. Words do matter. It is the reason that anti-Blackness is global, because the world consumes American media. So without further ado, I'm going to read a poem called They don't show white corpses on the news because we don't need proof that they're human. They don't show white corpses on the news because we don't need proof that they're human. The difference between a tragedy and an argument is who it happens to. So when they broadcast the killing of another man who looks like me, his body becomes spectacle, his name a rejection or reminder of what could happen to those worth burying. Oh, how they spill our blood for ink to write their eulogies. How they beat our aching bodies just to call the swelling growth. It's not lending a hand when it leaves us bruised and bloodied. It's not a pat on the back when it breaks through our skin. These nooses are not uplifting, and yet they hang us and call it support. When we meet them halfway, they burn us with the bridges, break our bones and name it bread. Then they beat us with the olive branch and dub the screaming music. So when I say Black Lives Matter, I mean that they do. I mean that the first time I heard it was from my own mouth, that I was never welcome here until I let myself in. And yes, they say we shape the womb before we leave it, meaning borders are people made, meaning my mother was my first country, and country is not a word for home. I was birthed without consent, deported, not evicted, and I do not remember my birth or the journey to America. But I am told I went screaming as they all do. Unlike my siblings before me, I did not die trying. Life, a betrayal to and of my body. I mean that my first lesson in displacement was my mother. I mean that every country is a lesson. I mean I clung for country like I do for mama. I now know that I was twice betrayed. Thank you.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much for offering that, Afak. Thank you. That was so beautiful, so powerful, so raw. And thank you for also contributing the global context of the power of words and how they have, and the media and storytelling, and how it both has the ability to uplift, but also to destroy. So thank you. Thank you so, so much for being here and for doing this. Thank you. Next up, to further, solidify us and get us into this conversation, I want to show a visual piece by a filmmaker by the name of Rashid Zakat. I always love seeing Rashid's work. It always fills me with so much love and joy, more love and joy for Black people. He put together a piece specifically for tonight, and I'm gonna just read a little bit about him before we share that. Rashid Zakat is a filmmaker and artist based in Philadelphia. He uses video, photography, design, audio, and the web to encourage people to find as much beauty, joy, and wonder as possible. Professionally, Rashid has a 15-year-long career as a director and cinematographer for nonfiction experimental films and music videos. He has done work for Nike, Intel, Grammy Award-winning artist India.Arie, Carmelo Anthony, Black Thought of the Roots, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, NBC, Comcast, Black Star Film Festival, he's working, Soul Train, Topic, WHYY, Philadelphia Contemporary, Mirror Arts, Rashad Newsom, and BET, to name a few. So without further ado, we'll showcase that piece that he put together for us.
Hi, my name is Rashid Zakat. I'm a filmmaker from Baltimore living in Philadelphia, and I'm really excited to share this short piece with y'all. That's more or less a meditation or a reflection around my thoughts on storytelling. Humans are really interesting creatures. We control the planet, and we control the planet, I think, because we're able to cooperate in large numbers really, really flexibly. We're the only beings that are able to do that. Bees can cooperate in large numbers, but not particularly flexibly. Bonobos can cooperate really flexibly, but not in large numbers. But humans were able to do both, and we're able to do both because we have imagination. We can create and believe in fictions, stories, narratives, this abstracted layer of reality beyond the physical reality of trees and rocks and wind and rivers that we live in. I think that we understand ourselves, we understand each other, and we understand the world through the stories that we're told, the stories that were told long before we got here, and most importantly, through the stories that we tell ourselves and that we reinforce with our own sort of internal narratives. My work, my interest, my curiosity, my kink is to really understand those narratives and the way they shape our individual and collective realities. I grew up in the 90s, watching a lot of TV, and so my work, I know, tends to feel like you're channel surfing through my subconscious. I'm personally interested in using beauty, joy, humor, and form to observe and challenge my own internalized narratives in the frame that I live within, and hopefully by sharing some of those explorations and sharing some of those experiments, I can help someone else do something similar, or at least entertain you with some pretty images that I've shot of beautiful Black people over the years, with some clips from some of my favorite thinkers. So I thank you for watching. Thank you for what you do, and I hope you enjoy.
Defending my imagination is key for me, it's important. From day one, once I moved into motion picture, I said, from here on, I defend my ideas. I defend my stories. I'm as greedy about my story as
Black people in America are classic outsiders. You have to have in any society sinners and saints. Some particle of the society has to take the blame for the sins of that society, the evil impulses of that society. In American society, we have been defined as the sinners. If you are the sinner, you are by definition extraordinary, meaning you are either super good or you are super evil. This notion of the extraordinary forces us narratively, when we begin to do our own stories, to write about ourselves, the notion of ordinary existence is denied, which is really what we come down to. When it comes down to actually telling stories, and what I really want to present to you is, how do we divest ourselves of the need to make ourselves extraordinary?
The catchphrase, what that was all about, the revolution will not be televised, that was about the fact that the first change that takes place is in your mind. You have to change your mind before you change the way you live and the way you move. So when we said that the revolution will not be televised, we were saying that, like, the thing that's going to change people is something that no one will ever be able to capture on film. It'll just be something that you see, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm on the wrong page, or I'm on the right page, but I'm on the wrong note. And I've got to get in sync with everyone else to understand what's happening in this country.
I was born Black and a woman. I am trying to become the strongest person I can become, to live the life I have been given, and to help effect change toward a livable future for this earth and for my children. As a Black, lesbian, feminist, socialist, poet, mother of two, including one boy and member of an interracial couple, I usually find myself part of some group in which the majority defines me as deviant, difficult, inferior, or just plain wrong. From my membership in all of these groups, I have learned that oppression and the intolerance of difference come in all shapes and sizes and colors and sexualities, and that among those of us who share the goals of liberation and a workable future for our children, there can be no hierarchies of oppression. I have learned that sexism, a belief in the inherent superiority of one sex over all others and thereby its right to dominance, and heterosexism, a belief in the inherent superiority of one pattern of loving over all others and thereby its right to dominance, both arise from the same source as racism, a belief in the inherent superiority of one race over all others and thereby its right to dominance. Oh, says a voice from the Black community, but being Black is normal. Well, I and many Black people of my age can remember grimly the days when it didn't used to be. I simply do not believe that one aspect of myself can possibly profit from the oppression of another part of my identity. I know that my people cannot possibly profit from the oppression of any other group which seeks the right to peaceful existence. Rather, we diminish ourselves by denying to others what we have shed blood to obtain for our children. And those children need to learn that they do not have to become like each other in order to work together for a future they will all share.
In a time like this, fighting to declare your own identity, your own story, therapeutizes you, gives you a sense of continuity, a human, where you've come from. Otherwise, you are a non-entity. So when you don't tell your story, you'll be a confused human being forever. And all human beings make stories to have a sense of continuity.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you, Rashid, for putting that together for us. The quote that stays with me is, when you don't tell your story, you'll be a confused human being. Some of you may have recognized some people from that video. Most of those people in the film are all locally based in Philly, and it's just beautiful to see Black people just look so beautiful up close like that. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I know I did. And now we're ready to get into our conversation. And I want to welcome our panelists to the stage. And just, a reminder to the audience, we're going to have this conversation, and then afterwards we're going to have some time for a Q&A. So I'm going to start with some introductions. First, Alicia Bell. Alicia Bell was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, and still lives there today. They work at the intersections of Afrofuturist imagination, journalism, land, food, and all the spaces in between. At Free Press, they work to transform the future of journalism via News Voices, a project organizing communities around information equity and community-centered journalism, and Media 2070, a project working towards making media reparations real. Alicia is also a parent, member of a local gardening collective called Angelo House, and a lover of big bodies of nature. Welcome, Alicia, and thank you for being here with us. Next up is Rashid Ajamu. Rashid is a fat, Black, queer John from Philly. Rashid runs the Freedom John page on Instagram, which informs, uplifts, and lists opportunities for all of the Philly fam. They are half of the Girls Room podcast, which is an open forum where they and their siblings fat in peace. Ajamu has organized calls to actions and mutual aids in Philadelphia. They also freelance for outlets like Blavity, Nor Life Mag, Wear Your Voice Mag, and Medium. Welcome, Rashid, and thank you so much for joining us. Next up is Feminista Jones. Feminista Jones is a Philadelphia-based feminist writer, public speaker, retired social worker, and community activist. She is an award-winning blogger and the author of 4 books, including the critically acclaimed 2019 release, Reclaiming Our Space: How Black Feminists Are Changing the World from the Tweets to the Streets. Her writing and activism centers Black American culture, feminism, critical race theory, intersectionality, mental health, poverty, and women's health and well-being. Her thought-provoking conversation-starting writing has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Time, Essence, Complex, Vox, Salon, and Ebony. In 2015, she co-founded and served as General Director of the Women's Freedom Conference, the first all-digital conference completely organized by and featuring only women of color. For her work, she was named one of She Knows 2015 Voices of the Year. In 2014, she launched a global anti-street harassment campaign, #YouOkSis. That same year, she was named one of the top 100 Black social influencers by The Root. Feminista is a mom, a mentor to young girls and women, and an outspoken advocate for the homeless, people living in poverty, and those living with psychiatric disabilities. Thank you so much, Feminista, for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Janine A. Cook. Janine A. Cook. For the last 10 years, Janine A. Cook has worked as a trusted writer for several startups, corporations, nonprofits, influencers, and most recently herself. In addition to holding a master's degree from the University of the Arts, Janine is also a Leeway Art and Transformation grantee and winner of the South Philly Review Difference Maker Award. Janine's work has been recognized by several national and international news outlets, including the New York Times, CNN, Ebony, BET, Barcroft TV, and Daily Mail. She is a proud educator and mother with 8 years of teaching creative writing in alternative schools and on city blocks. She recently returned from Nairobi, Kenya, and Birmingham, UK, where she facilitated art and social change workshops with youth from 15 countries around the world. Janine writes about the complex intersections of motherhood, activism, and the arts. Her pieces are featured in several publications, including Mothering Magazine, Girl God, Mahogany Baby, Good Mother Project, Printworks, Adelaide Magazine, and Midnight and Indigo. Janine is currently producing an art installation of her writings deconstructed into paper art sculptures, collages, and calligrams. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that right. Calligrams, called Conversations with Harriet. She is also the shopkeeper of Harriet's Bookshop in Philadelphia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm gonna put this on the gallery view because I wanna see everybody's face. Thank you all for being here tonight. It has been a year, and I'm saying that because there's really no way to describe this year. The first question is, I have is to everyone, with everything that we've seen, I'd mentioned global unrest, the pandemic, which is unprecedented. How do you feel the media has handled it? Anyone can take that. Go ahead, keep it real. It could be local media, national media. Tell me how you feel this was handled. Feminista looks like she has some thoughts.
I mean, it's kind of, like you say, irresponsible. Like, all buildings matter. That alone was just kind of, wait. I'm sorry, my thing clicked out for a minute. I was gonna say, like, all buildings matter. That alone was kind of just like very egregious, and it was like a reach, and it seemed like it was more, patronizing. And I feel like the writing should have been at least neutral. And that headline alone is just very direct and letting people know that they're very, I guess, ashamed of folks. And yeah, just not very cute or cool.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I'm concerned about the fear of journalists reporting on this and succumbing to the powers that be. Journalists are supposed to be the ones who try to tell the truth, right? Report the truth as it is, and supposed to have gumption, and are supposed to not be controlled by the government. And I as I read, whether it's local or national, every day it's a different position that a lot of these media sources are taking. And so the confusion, right? The public relies on the media to give them the information they need to survive and to thrive in these kinds of situations. And when the government has its hands in controlling what the media puts out, then we live in a fascist society. And I think that having government officials writing articles and trying to give us guidance or telling us these things, I find that to be problematic, particularly if it doesn't coincide with what, the experts are saying, right? Just because you're an elected official doesn't make you an expert on a global pandemic and a public health crisis. So I would love to see more. I would have loved to see more reporting from people who are actual experts. And when it comes to being Black and African people, I would love to hear more from African experts on how we can, live and survive in this thing, because it's killing us disproportionately and it's affecting our communities the most. So I'm not particularly interested in the words of somebody who lives in a cushy place outside in a Philly suburb and wants to tell us how we should be thinking about this. I don't want to hear about curfews that do nothing. I don't want to hear about, I'm tired of reading about the places being boarded up in neighborhoods that have shown no evidence of violence or anything like that. I want to hear from experts who can speak to our condition, and we have not gotten enough of that, but we damn sure get enough from the mayor.
Well, I think to that point, one of the things that we see a ton of is the platforming of police and law enforcement agencies, whether it be local police departments, sheriff's departments, ICE. The way that those departments of folks get platformed and quoted without delving into the context of what they're saying, the truthfulness of what they're saying, but then the scrutiny that people hold for regular folks, for folks who are out living life, for people who are in the streets. The scrutiny held there of like, is this trustworthy? Does this person have an agenda? Can we trust what they're saying? Is this subjective? Is this biased? The way that those two different bodies of people, the people don't get platformed. The law enforcement agencies do get platformed without being scrutinized. And the power imbalance that creates and the narrative balance that creates is the thing that just keeps perpetuating the same cycles that create the material conditions and the realities that we live in.
Anyone else want to chime in, Janine?
Hey y'all, I'm so hyped. Feminista, I can't wait to see you. She's coming in the bookshop. But I wanted to say that the thing that's been really helpful for me through all of this is building relationships with actual journalists. And building relationships with them beyond their journalism and beyond, the newspaper that they write for or whatever, but actually being able to like talk to them as human beings, and having a level of trust so that when there is something going on, I know who I'm willing to speak to, and who I'm like, nah, you know what I mean? Like that, there are journalists who I follow, and those are the people who, even outside of their publication, I trust. And so that's been supportive and helpful to me.
The common thread I'm hearing, and it kind of goes along with the trust factor, is the journalism should be challenging, should be held accountable for challenging these establishments, and they're not doing it, right? Like that, as somebody said, is the role of journalism. The watchdog is supposed to be the watchdog of government, but what we feel we're seeing right now is working in tandem almost with the government. Alicia, I want you to talk a little bit about Media 2070 and media reparations, because that was the first time I even heard the phrase media reparations. And I heard it, I'm like, I'm down for this. I'm not sure what this is, but I think I'm down for this. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And in talking to that, I really wanted to lift up what Janine was saying, that there are at the same time that I hold this critique around platforming and critique of the way that we don't have a voice and we don't have the capital structurally. I do want to acknowledge that there are so many journalists who are going hard every single day to cover these stories. And that is
fun.
Overwhelmingly, those are Black and brown journalists. Overwhelmingly, those are queer and trans journalists. And especially when we're at those intersections, even down here, I'm based in the South, and even down here in the South, at those intersections is where we see some of the best reporting. And so our media reparations work is building on that to say, we know that Black brilliance exists, and with that, the funding that we need, the structural support that we need, the narratives, the power given to the brilliance that we know exist, we would have an entirely different media ecosystem. And so this work is rooted in really uncovering and unearthing the harm, the racism, the anti-Blackness that's been perpetuated by newsrooms, but also the harm and the anti-Black racism that's been perpetuated by philanthropy, by government, by local institutions, where Black-owned and Black-led newsrooms have not received the same funding and the same support as white-led newsrooms. And you see that across the board with newsrooms led by people of color. But I mean, it goes all the way back to slavery, right? And so one of our work around Media 2070 is to unearth that harm and the efforts of calling for media reparations, and calling for media reparations as a pathway and a tool to transform the media ecosystems that we have right now into something that holds us in our full humanity and represents all of us and serves all of us by the time that we get to 2070. And we know that we have to start that work now. We can't just wait till 2069 and be like, all right, now it's time. We have to start that now so that the world we live in 2070 is the world we want to be in.
Yeah, I remember talking to you, Alicia, about how I think brilliant that project is, because I don't think anyone has actually studied media, and the role that it's played, right? And the way that it has been used as a tool for white supremacy in this country since Africans were kidnapped and brought here. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more, because I don't think many people really focus specifically on the media and the role that it's played in that. Feminista, I want you to talk a little bit about, Black girl missing, because I remember seeing the statistic that there are 65 to 75,000 Black women and girls missing. And I remember sharing that, and people were just in shock. They're like, that's a whole city, right? You would think that this would be all over the news, but it's not. Can you speak to that a little bit, FJ?
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at it, it's about 0.035% of the the national population, the population of Black women. So if you and girls, so if you can imagine, if 0.03% of white women were missing, the world would stop, right? Our country would stop. There would be no forward movement on anything until every Susan, Becky, and Ann was found. And yet they allow for us to languish, right? And so much of it is because of the pathologizing that's done, right? And so what Alicia's speaking of is this very Afrocentric approach to media, right? We must center us in our own narratives. We must tell the stories from within. And so with Black Girl Missing, this podcast I created with my two friends, a couple of years ago, we began talking about this. We're all passionate about this cause. And it was let's just do this podcast, right? In a group chat situation, which is how it works, right? That's where our conversations start. And so we really worked to put this together. We've done 2 seasons of it. I'm really excited because, it's gotten so much attention. I just was able to do this radio drop with McDonald's and iHeartRadio to be able to talk about it. So even though we're doing this independently, it's really reaching the people that it needs to reach. No one else is doing this, right? No one else has taken on this project of really focusing on the fact that these girls, and what we do is we focus on Black girls in the United States from birth to up to age 18. And we look at the circumstances of this as a true crime podcast, right? So there's not a whole lot of Black people doing true crime podcasts as it is. And then we focus specifically on their stories. And these are girls who maybe they've been found. We have the story of Camille Mobley, who she had a whole movie made about her, but how she was taken by a nurse and raised by the nurse and, grew to love that nurse, versus some that have never been found, like Georgia Lee Moses. it's just the stories and the commonalities and the ways in which the police have neglected, these stories. They peg them as runaways. How can you say a 4-year-old ran away? Where was the 4-year-old going? But it's this way that we look at that media treats Black girls as these deviants, as these inherently troubled. We have to actually go in our stories and say, there was nothing wrong at home. They were happy. They were well-adjusted. They were honor students, and feeling that need to say that this girl didn't do anything. She's just missing and no one cares. And so we really have delved into that. I think we've done 20 some odd episodes already. And, it's just growing and growing. And it's really interesting because we the only ones that were doing this, right? Of course, people now want to try to replicate, but when you go ahead and break the mold, as only Black women can do, that's going to happen. So we're really excited about that work. And we, again, from an Afrocentric point of view, and I'm going to big up Temple Africology Department, in which I am a part of, we really, really, really think it's important that we tell our stories, that we are the ones doing it. So you can listen to other true crime podcasts and you can hear sometimes they may touch on them, but they're never going to give it the nuance and the connection and that family perspective, that cultural perspective that we need to further understand what's happening in our stories. You know what I mean? So we're really excited about that. It's super important. But yeah, 0.035% of the Black female population in the United States is currently missing, and no one gives a damn.
And that's what we know of.
That's what we know of. That is what we know of. Remember when those young girls were going missing in West Philly? And I immediately made a connection. The media was not making a connection. And it's like, y'all don't see anything wrong with the fact that in like 5 weeks, 4 girls have gone missing from the same area. Nobody sees a problem with that. So we have to do what we have to do.
Speaking to the nuance, you mentioned like the nuance of telling those stories and why it's important for us to tell our stories. A lot of that comes from, the love, right, that we have for us and the care
Absolutely.
that we tend to have for us. When I was listening to the podcast and I realized like y'all are doing 2 things. Like you're not only fulfilling the gaps of the media, but fulfilling the gaps of law enforcement and the police, the work that the police are supposed to be doing. Can you give us a sense of what the investigation process is like to kind of accumulate all this information to put the podcast together?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because even though we research these, right, and we dig deep and we first start with what's already out there in the media, right? And a lot of it is duplicate information because oftentimes there's so little, right? But then we're like, you know what? Let's look on social media because the parents have probably been trying to use social media. So maybe we're going to get more information there. And then we're like looking at these archives and all these kinds of things. We're researching the police officers themselves. We're researching the people that are involved and their histories. This one guy was a doctor and I'm like, what's going on in his house? He has a private practice. Like we're really, really looking into this. One person that we had that went missing, we connected that Samuel Little. For those who don't know, he's like the most notorious serial killer in the history of the United States, and he happens to be a Black man. He was alluding to having taken another woman like a couple of weeks before this girl went missing. So we dig really deep. It's like nobody made this connection that maybe he had something to do with her missing, right? People are not making these connections. And so we really go in. But then what's also interesting is that when we put the episodes out, we've had family contacting us. We've had other people saying, I just wish somebody would have done this or, talked about this story, or I know this person and I can't speak out, but I do believe that this person did. We're getting all that kind of response. Things that the police would never get because we don't snitch, we don't talk, some of our folks may have had really bad connections with law enforcement, social work, and things like that. They don't want to talk to the police, but they're talking to us. And they're sending us messages. So even though we do the research and we do the investigating, we're still getting more information even after. So like we do these bonus episodes where we're like, we also got this info, you guys, so more than what we know the police are getting. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to help the investigations. We wanted to bring this Black woman, nurturing, loving, caring, these are our daughters kind of sense to this, to really try to draw people out and say, if there's any more information, y'all, bring it to us. You don't want to talk to police, fine, bring it to us. And that's what's happening. And so we see us as part of the continuum.
That is incredible. And y'all are, y'all are well-educated, accoladed folks, but still everyday people, right? Like,
absolutely.
And
it's not hard. And we're trying to show that it's like, you don't have to be a super pro. What we're learning with social media is that, this citizen journalism, this first person, this in the mix kind of reporting and documenting is super important. And so you just have to be passionate. You just have to be willing to do the work. And you get the platform. We're doing this independently, our own resources, because we're so committed to this, right? So, it's worth it.
Thank you. And that's really the purpose of this entire session. And I want to remind anyone who's watching to please drop your questions in the chat, and we will, I'll ask them at the end of the conversation. And speaking of citizens journalism, Rashid, I want you to talk to me about Freedom John. You described Freedom John as a Black Philly blog dedicated to highlighting and sharing stories for us, by us. Tell us about the journey with Freedom John. It started out as Blackness Is, and now it's become Freedom John, I think around maybe June. Tell us about the journey and why you decided to pivot. You're on mute.
Thank you for that. That was awkward. Thank you. I was gonna say that. So when I originally started the original page, which was Blackness Is, it was essentially trying to take stories from different Black people, and sharing what their narrative of Blackness is. Because as we know, like, Blackness is not a monolith, and I think that's sometimes where people get caught up, and that's why we're so shocked when Black people have opposing opinions, because we're like, oh wow, like, you're Black. That's interesting. Why do you have that, mindset and viewpoint? And so I actually had just kind of finished that project, and it had been done for a few years because I did that back in college. And so the page was just there, and I had a little bit of a following already on it. And so what I had decided to do was, there was so much happening in the streets, and people were looking for different things to do and, different ways to get involved. So I just decided to make it like this big, I guess you could say, forum of like, different things to do, different ways to keep yourself engaged and not, succumb to quote unquote like white fatigue and things like that. So many people are always looking for things. And I mean, I know some things to some people aren't necessarily accessible. Like, people can say that, like, the news is right there and Google is right there. But as me and you, Sophia, had actually discussed on the phone, there's actually paywalls to a lot of websites now to even get like your news online. So it's like, where do you actually go to get this information if not social media? And also, some people just in general don't have that time to actually just sit down and be watching the news all the time. Like, there are single mothers who interact with me all the time who tell me that, like, when they come home, they don't want to watch the news. Scrolling through Instagram is much more pleasurable than watching the news and watching some fucked up shit that happened. So like, being able to see how they can, in their own time barriers and within their own time restraints, still help out the community and still help, contribute to like all the success that's been going on in different grassroots organizations. And just, the continuous struggle in general, it's been very helpful to them, and it's just been overall helpful to a lot of people. So yeah, it's just about accessibility, to be honest, and just making sure that people stay engaged.
Yes, the page has grown so much and has so much engagement, especially since June. Can you give us a sense of what kind of content and services you're sharing, and also why you feel the page kind of grew in following and when it came to followers and engagement in June?
Well, so a lot of the stuff that I share, of course, is I like to prioritize mutual aid funds specifically. And I try not to censor Black men because they get enough censoring and a lot of work already. So it's essentially like, just usually mutual aid funds, different actions that people can go to. I myself go to like different things. Like, I do the Germantown Community Fridge. So if I'm doing something, I'm always taking a picture and letting people know, you can go do this. It's very easy. And then also, I feel like the page has kind of challenged people on what nuance can look like a little bit. So everybody knows I'm very active in saying that I don't care about looting. Like, it's a valid form of protest. But in the same regard, I can still get on there and I can still collect the information of those different Black businesses that have been struck by them, help them collect funds to get back on their feet. And, you know, while people are under the comments like, oh my God, like, you're serving us bullshit, I'm also like, while you complained, I did something and you didn't. So, like, like, it's trying to make sure that people understand that you can have a certain opinion, you can have a certain viewpoint, but as long as you're making sure you're doing something to like fix that is really what's important. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And I feel like a lot of this is going to go back to June because that was such a pivotal moment this year. And Janine, I know when protests were happening in June, you decided to give out books to protesters with money that was donated to you. Can you tell me about why you made that decision and what books you were giving out?
Yeah, so June was like a huge spike for a lot of reasons, right? So we decided to go out to Minneapolis. That was our first kind of place that we was like, I don't have much. What I have a bunch of is all these books. And somebody had donated like a small amount, like $100. And it was just like, if you want, what would you want to use this for? Can we use it for this or that? And I was just like, none of that, the stuff that they were asking me made any sense at the time. But when I saw what was happening in Minneapolis, I was like, well, I could use it at least for this, right? And so, we got a few copies of the autobiography of Malcolm X. We got a few copies of Bound from the Promised Land, which is Harriet Tubman's biography, and those were pivotal for me in my walk, and I felt like would be pivotal for anybody who was out on the street doing this work in whatever capacity they felt like they was doing the work. If they wanted a book, they could have one. And so, as opposed to holding up signs, what we went out and did was we held up books. We did that in Minneapolis and Kentucky. We did it here in Philly, of course, and we still continue to give out books to this day. Here at the bookshop. So this is a bookshop you can come to with absolutely no money and walk away with a book for sure. And those books are typically around organizing, activism, and making sure folks understand that those are skills that you can build and that you're not necessarily wake up one morning and understand how to do that work. It might mean that you need to do some reading, of course.
I love that. I've never seen anyone do that before at all. So I think that was amazing. And Alicia, I want to refer to a quote from the Media 2070 essay. It says, it's a 100-page essay, by the way, on media reparations. That's brilliantly thorough. Fueled by Black death and by those who refuse to accept it, the public uprisings have forced a reckoning in this country. Powerful institutions, from governments to museums to universities to newsrooms, are being challenged to address their own anti-Black racism. The institutions and systems people are protesting have all contributed to the prevention of Black freedom and liberation. Can you speak to that and also share some of your discoveries during this research as you were researching media reparations and the history of media and racism and how it's tied?
Yeah, so I think when in the American context, right, we know that we're living under white supremacy, we know we're living under patriarchy, capitalism, all of these things. And it would be a fool's errand to believe that any sector, industry, or system underneath that umbrella and banner is absent or divorced from any of those systems. And so newsrooms, media, the media system is the same way, right? It's very clear the ways that policing and criminal injustice is complicit with those systems. It's very clear the way that those things kind of perpetuate housing, civic engagement, economics, and education. But what we aren't always clear about is the way that the media does that. And so that's why it was really important for us to lift that up, to say that this is a system and a structure full of various infrastructures, various organizations, various individuals. But yet and still, this is a system that is both supporting and a part of this umbrella of various things that marginalize and minoritize and harm us. And so when we were doing this work, it came out of conversations that we were having where we were asking folks questions like, what is your relationship with local news? And across the board, no matter where we were, when we were talking to Black folks and when we were talking to Black and brown folks and people of color in general, a lot of times people were saying there is no relationship, or I don't trust local news, or the way they report on my community is trash. And so when we're hearing that across the board, then we begin to realize that that's a symptom and not a core issue. And so a lot of the Media 2070 writing was excavating and figuring out kind of how do we pull back the layers of this onion. And so some of the things that were most interesting to me, and like you said, it is 100 pages. We started off thinking we were going to write a 750-word op-ed. That was not what happened. But one of the things that we found, I think, it comes down to the financial structure and financial system of newsrooms. And we talked pretty early on about the history of slave ads, right? So during slavery, during chattel slavery, one of the things that was happening is that a lot of times the printer and the publisher of a paper would be the same person. This person would also be the broker of human trafficking, because buyers and sellers of enslaved people were buying and selling and auctioning and posting about it in newspapers. And the newspapers were making money off of this. And so the newspapers were running slave ads from slave owners, running ads about missing enslaved people. So, Feminista, you were talking about people who don't care about missing Black folks, but these people really cared about their missing Black property. And the newspapers were complicit in that. So I think that that was one of the things that was happening then. And so we were kind of like, okay, well, then what happened? Like, what happened after the Emancipation Proclamation? What happened after people were released and freed themselves from slavery? And what we were able to trace was the way that these financial systems for slave ads informed the way that classified ads were created, right? And classified ads became a core part of the financial structure of newsrooms. And one of the things that's very clear, and people talk about it all the time, is the way that like Craigslist and digital platforms and social media platforms harmed classifieds and therefore harmed the revenue processes of newsrooms. What doesn't get talked about, though, is that even prior to Craigslist and prior to the classified ads, the thing that those evolved from was the facilitation of human trafficking via chattel slavery. And so when we look at this full circle, of course, it was never sustainable, because the bondage and capture of people was never sustainable, and systems built from that were never sustainable. And so that was one of the things. And one of the other things kind of coming up, or it was coming up around trust, right? Is we were like, what is the history of this relationship? What was the distribution? What was the relationship between newsrooms and communities? And there are folks who have done a lot of research around what's called newspaper redlining. So it's where newsrooms would create maps similar to housing redlining, and they would just not distribute to Black and brown neighborhoods. And they could make enough profit because it was ad-based, and the advertisers were getting the audience they wanted, which was wealthy white folks, that they didn't feel like they needed to distribute to Black and brown communities. And so a lot of those same newspapers who are today apologizing for harming Black and brown communities, trying to rebuild trust with Black and brown communities, shouldn't have been redlining in the first place. And so I think a lot of these things we see coming full circle now because they were never sustainable, because racism and white supremacy is not a sustainable system. So those are some of the uncoverings, and there's so many more in there. I think one of the things that hurts me the most is there was a Black editor who was imprisoned by the United States government for running a letter to the editor. A Black woman wrote a letter to the editor criticizing the government for the way that they persecuted Black veterans for their participation in a riot. And simply from this Black editor running this letter to the editor, they put Espionage Act charges on him, and he was incarcerated. And so those are the things that we're uncovering in this work.
Censorship from the media itself. I think what's really interesting about everything that you said is you're connecting a lot of dots, because I think we make general statements sometimes about this country was built on, you know, the backs of Black people, right? But you're literally saying like these institutions, these legacy institutions and newsrooms were literally built on backs of Black people, right? These slave ads. So I think that you're connecting a lot of dots for me and hopefully for a lot of people. And you mentioning how, you know, now there's this big, how do we fund newsrooms? How do we, because it was built on something that was never sustainable. Like you might have to break it down and create something new. Right. So Janine, I wanted to ask you a question. You had an interview with the Inquirer actually, where you mentioned your bookshop being a place to invoke challenging conversations about race. You wanted it to be a community space for folks to come together, discuss ideas and debate in a healthy way. What kind of conversations do you see happening in Harriet's bookshop?
Well, I don't know if you know, we opened in February. We were shut down by March 10th. So we had 6 weeks that we were actually open and able to do things the way that we thought we were going to do them. Instead, we've had to pivot that in a lot of different ways. So for instance, a few weeks ago, we held what we called a sisterhood sit-in, where this event, and it's so hard to explain what the event was because it just had so many layers. But it was an event where people weren't allowed to speak at all. And so they had to figure out ways to communicate without words and actually become better listeners, which is, you know, something that for whatever reason, a lot of us are failing at. And so it was like, okay, well, here you come to something where you're so used to sharing. And now you don't get to, right? Now you get to be on the other side of that. And we based that entire event around Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste. And so what was crazy, like we just would have never imagined would have happened is the interns here did a TikTok video that made its way to Isabel Wilkerson, which got her, between that and the article that the Inquirer did on the story, she flew into Philadelphia and signed all the copies of the book that we were giving away. And so again, like the ways in which, you know, I say a lot that it's the young people that are really, really leading what we're doing here, right? Like they you know, they're changing the space around. They're telling me what kind of books they think they want to see. They're like, and these are people that are in high school, right? Who are like adamant about the way things should look, and really were pivotal in putting the sisterhood sit-in together.
I love that. And, you know, one of the reasons why I really wanted you to be a part of this conversation is because, you know, you're literally creating space, right? Brick and mortar space for us to listen, as you say, and have these conversations and share these stories in a non-traditional way. And I think that's amazing. And, you know, in line with creating space, Feminista, I want to talk to you about your book, Reclaiming Our Space. You know, you talk about how Twitter has been used by Black feminists. How have you seen Black people utilize social media to tell their full stories when they feel like they're not seeing it in mainstream media?
You know, I think that we really started paying attention to this back in like 2012 and 2013 when a lot of the activism that was happening, particularly in New York around stop and frisk and some other movements that were going on that, you know, Trayvon Martin was killed, and then we go into 2014 and the Ferguson uprising with the death of Michael Brown, and you know all these things that were happening. We started seeing that people were able to use social media to get information out, and a lot of that information was like life-saving information. It was organizing information and things like that. And I think that that was when people realized that Twitter in particular was more than just a conversational space for us to get together. It was really about, wow, we have these platforms to connect people kind of across the country, globally, and to really start letting the world know what's happening in our daily lives. And then this being able to use video to record what's actually happening. And so we really started seeing that in 2013, 2014, that people were able to use their smartphones to record things and post it. And so the media, the mainstream media was starting to rely on, again, I talked about these citizen journalists, right? They started relying on their first person videos and captures of what was happening in these spaces. And it really changed the ways that Black people could tell stories and African people could tell stories. Because the mainstream media, we could submit our stories and they opted whether or not, we're gonna tell these stories. I don't know, is this newsworthy enough? But then we were able to use social media and let people know this is newsworthy, right? So people started getting 1 million followers because they were able to share these videos. And then next thing you see, I'm with CBS News, can Can we use this video? I'm with NBC News. Can we use this video? Can we use this photo? They were relying on us to tell that. And so I think that became very, very powerful for those people that had been on the ground and in their communities doing that work. And it wasn't just about responding to the death of Black people. It started becoming something that we could use for all kinds of information, and then promoting these Black businesses, right? So you have these bookstores and these art galleries and these other things that Black people are doing that should have been getting attention. But social media became a place where people could showcase their talents and their creativity and their businesses. And we were able to find each other in the space. And it continues to this day. Like we're still finding these powerful ways to use social media to not only tell our stories, but to also connect with other people's stories, learn about what's going on in other places, build community, which has been the most important thing. The strongest weapon we have against white supremacy is African community. So we've been building community and building these home spaces for ourselves to connect with people we would have never met before, right? So you think of the African Holocaust, you think of slavery and the displacement and how they tried to spread us everywhere. And now we're all coming back together. And that is so powerful. And that's why you see all this disinformation and misinformation trying to silence those of us that are telling the truth and connecting with each other. And it's so powerful. And when I said reclaiming our space, we are occupying and reclaiming a space that should have always been ours. We should have always been on the front lines of media, of journalism, of this documentation of what has been happening in our own narratives. And we are finally able to do it because there's no gatekeeping. There's nobody telling us that we cannot do it.
Thank you so much. Just listening to you talk about, kind of how mainstream media then began to follow the Black people on social media who were sharing these stories. I remember around 2014, 2015, I remember thinking like they're holding the media accountable and they're sharing like these unarmed Black people who were getting killed by police. They're sharing it at such a rate that if the media doesn't cover it, they just look negligent. So it was really, really holding people accountable. And I'm glad that you brought that up. And just to connect with that thought, there's a quote from the Media 2070 essay that I want to share. It says, "Each new technology has offered us Black people a chance to own and control the telling of our own stories and challenge damaging narratives." So it's perfectly in line. Rashid, I want to talk to you a bit about Freedom John again. There was in an interview you said, sometimes people see big words and they're kind of like, I can't necessarily have a conversation with them. So I'm just going to resort to being aggressive and arguing. I try to be chill and I try to be very informal with people, let people know that I'm not some bot or some guy in a white suit behind a desk just typing all day. I'm a real person. Can you speak to why that's so important when it comes to engaging with the Philadelphia community?
Yeah, I think it's important because I come from the Philadelphia school system. So I know firsthand that like it fails people all the time. And it's at no fault of anybody's, but sometimes when people are met with big words, they're met with like big discussions and things like that they're not necessarily used to. People know things, but sometimes they can't put a name to it. So what I like to do a lot of times is like make things as simple as possible and put things in simplest terms so everybody can understand what conversation that we're having. And I'm not saying that people can't go out and say big words, they can't have an extensive vocabulary. That's none of that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is we have to be aware of who our audience is. And as we start to make sure that we're down on, everybody's level, they start to come up with us. So, it's just about making sure that everybody is on the same train and that we all are getting to the same place at the same time. Not necessarily at the same pace, but making sure that we're able to, lend a helping hand when we can. Showing people that we support them and showing people that we're not, again, just bots, just saying anything online that's not making sense to people. Sometimes you have to, just mild it down sometimes, not necessarily all the time, but sometimes.
Yeah, make it plain and make it accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah. The final question I want to ask you all before we get into Q&A, what does the new media landscape that you imagine look like? Like for Alicia, what does media reparations, what does 2070 look like? Tell us what in your wildest dreams, what that looks like to you. And also, if you can, weave in the importance of Black people telling their stories.
I think it's structurally different, right? Like I think when we have media ecosystems that serve us well, then Black folks are able to be housed, right? And Black folks are have access to the education that we need and the systems that we need, because media ecosystems are creating the cultures that make those policies real. So I think one of the ways we'll know if we have the media ecosystems we need is if we have the policies that we all need to thrive. And until we have the policies that we all need to thrive, whether that be around education, transportation, economics, housing, whatever, then we'll know that there's something about the media ecosystems that's not serving us well. I think you'll see much more Black ownership. I think there'll be a lot more, there'll be more co-ops. I think there'll be more collaboratives. I think there will be a lot more partnership between people who name themselves as journalists and other keepers of the stories of our people. I think that there'll be a role for artists and technologists to play in the media ecosystems that I dream of being different. And I think we'll figure out what is our lane and how to not only run in our lane, but weave those lanes together. Those are the things that I'm thinking of. And I think there's so many things that different things it's gonna take to get us there. But I think you'll see Spanish language news that's run by Afro-Latinx people. I think you'll see.
There's a thought.
You'll see mainstream newsrooms with Black faces and Black folks who are leaders in those organizations. And so I think it'll be really different. But I think in that way, it'll not only serve us, the folks on this call, the folks we're in community with, but it will be serving all people better. Because when we win these things, when we win in ways where everyone is housed, where everyone is treated in their full humanity, that's a win for everyone. So that's the thing that I'm hopeful for.
Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about the new media landscape quickly before we go to Q&A?
I think that it'll be decentralized. I think that right now, even in talking about like, oh, this is a Black newspaper or a Black magazine, like that doesn't really fully make sense, because what does that actually mean for real? And I think that what you're gonna see is folks that are more tribal and working with folks who meet them ethically and meet them based on their values. And that is gonna be your tribe, and your tribe will report for yourselves, and your tribe will speak to yourselves, and that these big like titles or these big groupings that don't make sense now, we won't continue to try to reinforce them because they don't make sense.
Anyone else? Rashid, FJ?
I was going to say that it will be sort of like Feminista said earlier, which is consistency. So not at one moment saying this and, making a stand against the people. And then when the people call you out, you do a bullshit piece to talk about, oh, we were just, that was not necessarily real. We just were misinformed. Like, no, making sure that you do the work and making sure that you're doing the work for the people so that there are no mess ups. We have to come back to this and do a panel discussion on why it's important to not fuck up. Yeah.
Thank you for keeping it real and raw, Rashid. FJ?
I was, we talk about media landscape, and there was definitely a comment about fake news. And I have to say that I get troubled when people give any credit to this idea of fake news. And here's why. As, Black people, as African people, as non-white people, right? We are susceptible to having our work be called fake news. For those of us that are bloggers or, people that run our own websites and want to be able, we still have freedom of the press. We still have the right to write and say whatever it is that we want to say. This is not quite a fascist, country yet. And so even if we are lying through our teeth, we have the right to say it and to put it out. And I believe in protecting that right. It is up to American citizens to be able to determine what is real and what is not through their own research and things like that. The problem is not this so-called fake news. The problem is the lack of education that goes into critical thinking and discernment. The fact that we have so many people that are vulnerable and susceptible to lies and nonsense. And so I should be able to write and publish, and this is across the board. I don't care what your leaning is, what your point of view is. You have the right to write and publish whatever it is you want to do. It is up to the people, it's up to the public to respond in a way that holds you accountable, pushes you back, is able to critique and debunk. But once we start getting into this place of calling things fake news or fake this or fake that, then we set ourselves up to turn into a society that like legally dismisses and penalizes people for saying things that don't go along with what the government wants us to say, or doesn't go along with whatever the overarching agenda is. And so I think that the work is on a different side. And I know that view is a little bit different than what a lot of people say, but because we're all human and because we're all biased, any of us deciding that something is fake news without being able to quantifiably reject it and prove that, we're participating in something that can have a really bad snowball effect and really begin to limit the freedom of the press and freedom of expression. So we have to be mindful about that.
Thank you for saying that, FJ. I think the credibility of Black journalism, Black stories is always
we're the first ones that are going to be called fake news. We're the first ones that are going to be, dismissed and silenced. And so when we participate in that, we are setting ourselves up to be erased from the media landscape.
Thank you. I want to open it up to Q&A. A question that Jim Friedlich asked is, understood that the mainstream media has been very, very far from perfect in covering America. Can you tell us what, if any, examples, stories, investigative news, individual journalists, and or specific media that give you hope that media can improve and better serve the people? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah. Does somebody else have something to say? I'm sorry. I don't want to. You can go ahead, Alicia. Go off. I'll do mine after.
She said, go off, sis.
I was gonna say, there's really dope news organizations across this country that are getting this right and doing this well. You have organizations like the Tribe and in Chicago that are doing this well. You have organizations in Michigan like Flint Beat that are doing this well. In Detroit, you have Outlier Media that's doing this well. In Philly, there's all of y'all, plus a whole bunch of other Black journalists that are doing this well. In Memphis, there's MLK 50. In the Southern region, there's Scalawag. There are so many examples of people who are doing this well. Like I said earlier, the first thing I said was disproportionately, these are Black and brown people. Disproportionately, these are queer and trans people. And these are women folk. Those are the folks who are getting it right. So I would say, and the first attempt to kind of find the hope is to figure out those places and look there, and then figure out how you can resource these folks more, support these folks more, help them scale, help their models travel, because there are folks who are getting it right across this country.
Black Girl Missing Podcast, Media 2070, Freedom John, Harriet's Bookshop. Next question is, can the panel speak to the need for reinventing how we teach journalism and media making? This is from Nadine Patterson.
Go ahead.
No, okay. I was gonna say that no, mine is just really quick. I think that just in general, I think reinventing is letting people know that, like we said earlier, you don't necessarily have to work for the Inquirer or Essence or things like that to call yourself a journalist. Like, bloggers are journalists. Like, we tell the truth, not necessarily the truth all the time, but we tell our stories all the time. It's just about who is being lifted up necessarily.
So I think that we have to again, I'm going to always go back to the narrative and who is centered in narratives and who created this concept of journalism. Was it us? Because if we didn't create it, then why are we beholden to it, right? And so the rules that have been prescribed for what is considered journalism and investigative journalism or what have you, how does that apply to African people. Our journalism has been primarily oral tradition. So where's the capture for that? And how do we take the nuances of oral communication and the storytelling that we have and the reporting that Aunt Janine, who was sitting on her porch and what she saw happening going down the street when the police came and this brother was here, how do we translate what she said onto paper in a way that makes sense? Why are they sending a white journalist to do this? That white journalist can't speak Aunt Janine's language. So we need to make sure that we are there. So when we're teaching journalism, we're teaching media, we need to be respecting the cultural nuances of Indigenous people and Latin people and African people, and making sure that we're not just teaching this Eurocentric approach to journalism and media reporting. We need to be more inclusive of what it takes to report on our stories. And I don't think that that's happening enough. And I think that those of you that are getting into communications as a discipline and journalism as a discipline or as a career, you need to start interrogating what you're learning and how it's shaping how you talk about your own people, and whether or not that feels natural to you and whether it feels right, and rely on your cultural memory to push back against that. So let's see more of us teaching, more of us getting into that space where we can start changing that, because it's all about how the narrative is reported.
And I just want to jump in really quickly and say that's why it was really important with this session to mention non-traditional means. And even the phrase non-traditional is weird because what's
still Eurocentric, right?
Yeah,
so what's traditional, right? Why aren't we traditional and they're non-traditional?
Exactly. And I wanted to make sure that we have this conversation in this way, because we do tell, historically within our heritage, we tell stories differently and always have. And so often in these institutions, it's, oh, we can't find them when it comes to reporters of color. But it's like, are you open to people who have a different way of telling stories, right? Because not everyone went to the J schools, and everyone had access and the ability to go to these J schools. So I think that's important to touch on. The next question is it even worth anything to submit an apology for the past harms like National Geographic did? What does the accounting process look like for newsrooms in an ideal world? Diverting that excess funding and publishing the receipts, coming up with succession plans?
I think that we get to stop trying to put blanket umbrellas over solutions, right? And so one, like I said before, I got 1,000,000 emails saying, we stand with Black Lives and Black Life Matters to this organization, company, institution, blah, blah, blah. And then when it came down to account for those actions, all those words, there hasn't been anything that has backed that up still now. There was a bunch of committees that were created, right? A bunch of think tanks and study groups and stuff, but nothing actually has okay, this is now solved, right? Because there are things that could actually be solved if folks were willing to do that work. And I just, for me, I'm looking at a lot of these media organizations and they don't have a liberation philosophy. They don't have this is the solution that we're seeking to complete by this time. Right. And I'd say give folks some, when you make a demand on somebody, you also say, here's the deadline on that demand. Right. If I need this by this time, this date, not just willy-nilly, I want. No, I want this by Monday. Right. And an accountability plan. And if I don't have it by Monday, this is what's going to happen. And I think that we've kind of been on the other side of it on this asking and pleading and, really placating and being far too kind to folks and then accepting these emails. I don't want that in my inbox at all, right? Don't send it this way, right? Because your actions is what's going to speak way louder than any of these social media postings or newsletter postings. I'm so over it. So no, I don't think that those apologies mean much. That's like you're in a relationship with somebody who keeps punching you in your face and then apologizing for it. No thanks.
Apologies without reparations mean nothing.
Until
you change your newsroom, you change your newsroom to reflect the community. So Philadelphia is 43% Black. Until your newsrooms reflect that reality, then I don't want to hear any apology.
And maybe they won't, feminista, right? They might never, you might not.
Oh, no, they never will.
You might never have to hire my folk, right?
We know that.
Have to hire my folk. I'ma hire my folks.
I'ma hire my folks.
You know, and that feels better to me than any like, you know, trying to plead for somebody to see my work.
Exactly. And knowing that that's not going to happen, like, right, because I'm not begging for anything. I'm not asking for anything. The thing is, y'all come to me. Y'all always come to me. I don't ever come to you. I don't pitch to you. I don't ask you to write nothing.
Right?
So exactly.
Same thing as your podcast.
So understanding, right, like with those of us that have these platforms, understanding that they're constantly coming to us, we don't have to beg for anything. But again, for me, the standard is if your newsroom does not reflect the demographics of the community that you're reporting on, then there's not really much that you can say to me about how much you say we matter or what have you. No. What you're afraid of is the competition we offer. We have our own platforms, our own bookstores, our own media, and we're getting more attention than you are. So you're afraid of it. That's why you want us to come to your side and contribute to your things.
And we get to be selective about which reporters we give those stories to, right? Like, my story is my story. It's a jewel. You know, you might get a piece of it. Maybe.
You can cite it if you want to.
Right?
Put it in your you can cite my story in your bibliography.
Word. I want to, there's this quote, this farmer at this place called Sylvanaqua Farms named Chris Newman. He's a Black and Indigenous farmer, but I wanted to lift up a quote from him because I think it applies to this, but all kinds of institutions that are, like you said, are sending the emails and saying they commit, they love Black lives, but don't have Black people in leadership and with power in their organizations. And what Chris said was, any gesture regarding dispossession or redistribution that results in white people feeling better and Indigenous people in the exact same position that we were in before the white people felt better is really just an affirmation of white supremacy. And so I think when folks are considering their DEI plans, their diversity, their equity, inclusion plans, their plans for apologizing, for reconciliation, for restitution, whatever that is, for race equity, that if it's making the white folks in your organization feel better and it's leaving Black and Indigenous and other people of color in the same place, the same material conditions, the same levels of power that the organizations are still being built on the back of, all that is a perpetuation of white supremacy. It may feel good to you, it may make you smile, it may even look pretty, but if there's no material reality shift, then people are still going to keep organizing against you and organizing around you.
And we'll eventually burn it down.
Yeah.
That's what we see in revolutions. The first thing to go is the media propaganda. So, you keep it up, the people will burn you to the ground.
Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of what I said in the beginning, right? Like, not only failing your communities, we don't see dramatic shifts, they won't only fail your communities, but you will fail, period. And a lot of the times we're not seeing the change that we need to see is because people don't want to feel uncomfortable. White people don't want to feel uncomfortable. But I really want to thank this panel for everything that you've given. Thank you for being here and sharing your insight. I hope that this influences some people to change and operate differently within media. I hope that this inspires and invigorates members of the community who were watching and who will be watching when I share this everywhere to make sure that they get this information. Please check out Feminista Jones's Black Girl Missing podcast. Please check out Media 2070. It's an incredible document. Just a wealth of information. Please check out Freedom John, that has been such a resource for Philadelphians. Please check out Harriet's Bookshop as well, that has been an actual physical space for Black people to feel free and to feel safe and to tell their stories and feel listened to. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for watching and being a part of this summit. Have a great night. I see Cheryl. What's good, girl? Thank you.
Y'all, okay? Y'all just spit the fire that we all needed to hear. I know you can't see the chat, but the chat is absolutely popping. Y'all have so many hand claps and amens and talk that talk in the chat. So thank you so much for sharing this. And just like Sophia said, I hope the people are really listening. The people who need to hear this message, I really hope they are listening. This is a great way to cap off the 3 days that we all had together to really think about, again, reimagining new systems for Philadelphia journalism, not reconfiguring the existing one, but really thinking about how we build systems that are liberatory that support the builders of equitable things, as opposed to trying to, you know, change inequitable organizations to be more equitable, and to really create a future in which we increase the agency of our community and not just tell stories from the perspective of nowhere. So thank you all so much for coming and engaging in this process. We'll be in touch next week with more resources, with the recordings of all of these sessions that we had. And yeah, I hope you all have a good night. Get some good food to eat, something good to drink, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.